And this was a place that my 7 times great grandfather William Darch had owned. So there was a mill nearby there. So it was like kind of almost in a way a bit like a detective, like following up these leads, and just like I had done, like you talked about world building with like the Moor and Vale. I started doing it in a similar way for Durlescombe, but it was just like I talked about is these kind of images that this very particular type of image or subject matter that fitted into my notion of what this place is. And so it's kind of something that there is like an element of nostalgia, but it's this kind of mix of like past and present. So I like that, she's wearing a Calvin Klein t-shirt. So it kind of, it does date it. It's not like I'm trying to make something that looks old or is in the past, but I'm obviously like drawing on this notion of the past and also talking about how the nature of kind of rural life has changed.
Which leads me into this series. It's an ongoing series called Durlescombe, and I would love to take a little closer look into that. You had mentioned that in the previous section a little bit about how this is kind of a documentary type thing, and earlier when I asked you that question about research and how you're kind of researching it, this place, I'm kind of curious. With that project, how much of that research was important? And could you kind of like talk about it and give us a little background on the project, a little bit deeper look into it? Yeah.
So the original idea for Durlescombe started off kind of similar to some of the work I've been making previously. Do you want me to share a screen with the work, or?
Of course, yeah. Let's take a look at
it. So maybe give you like a bit of background to the project. So and I'll click through the images. Maybe that's the best way to do it. So it kind of started off. I needed to do a project for my MFA. I didn't really know what to do, but I was interested in this area in Devon. There was between the two moors. You got Dartmoor in the south and Exmoor to the north. So I was just exploring, taking pictures, kind of finding my way around really. And I'd come up with quite like a convoluted, like fictional premise. I'd come up with a name quite quickly, Durlescombe. And my original idea was to maybe do something that was like black and white, kind of staged in the vein that I had been working on. So that was the original idea. And then I thought, well, people need to populate this place, Durlescombe. So I remembered the threshers that I'd been to previously, this place where we were doing this work. And I thought, well, that makes sense, because I was interested in this idea of like rurality. And so I went along and they weren't there, but I spoke to another guy and said, oh, they're out working on a farm. They'll be back another day. And so the place wasn't far from a town called Winkley. So I went there and it was like a sort of drizzly sort of, probably would have been like late winter, early spring by now. And I was kind of walking around and I knew from my dad was really interested in family history before I was born and like a bit into when I was kind of like a young child. And this was before it became popular and you had all the big TV shows and the ancestry websites. And so he'd researched our family history in the surname Darch, down to Devon. So I knew we had a history in this area and in this place. And I just thought for fun, I'd go into the churchyard and see if I could find like any Darches in gravestones in the churchyard. And then amazingly, like the gravestone just outside the front door of the church was like a Robert Darch. I was just like, oh, wow, because my name's always been reasonably unusual. I haven't met any of the Darches outside of the immediate family. And it was kind of one of those jigsaw puzzle moments. I was just like, okay, this is what Durlescombe is. This is like a way into this project. It's about this place that I'm interested in anyway. Why am I interested in it? I've got familial history here. It's a great way into making work in the landscape. And I found out that that my ancestors ran grain mills. So they kind of process grain to like, I guess, grain like wheat in these kind of mills. And so this is like an original picture from the kind of around sort of like 1890, I would have said. And the guy lying down, the miller, is Richard Darch. So he'd be my three or four times great uncle. And so I think it was my four times great grandfather was also Robert Darch, and he owned a mill in a town in kind of mid North Devon. And the gravestone I found was his cousin, who was also called Robert Darch. So it was amazing for me. Like, this is all kind of information I'd found out from my father. So this was where the research started. He had like a big A4 folder with lots of information, like family tree and all that kind of stuff. So he traced the family back to, I'd say maybe like the 1620s. And then interestingly, latterly, my uncle, during all the COVID lockdowns, he went online and he found a link from our family back further. So the surname Darch is originally French. It would have had an E on the end. It kind of means under the arch or near the arch. So he found a link back to, like a direct link back to the Norman Conquest and Norman the Conqueror. So the Norman king, I'm on a direct line back to him as a descendant, which is kind of crazy. So this was the starting point. I didn't know that then, but this was the kind of the way into the project. And so I just started taking pictures with the threshers. And actually, I'll go back to this image. So then my dad told me about this place that my uncle found it online. There was like a website which was kind of wreck of the week, where people were selling like these kind of places that are kind of wrecks that people can buy to do up. And this was a place that my 7 times great grandfather William Darch had owned. So there was a mill nearby there. So it was like kind of almost in a way a bit like a detective, like following up these leads, and just like I had done, like you talked about world building with like the Moor and Vale. I started doing it in a similar way for Durlescombe, but it was just like I talked about, is these kind of images, that these very particular type of image or subject matter that fitted into my notion of what this place is. And so it's kind of something that there is like an element of nostalgia, but it's this kind of mix of like past and present. So I like that, she's wearing a Calvin Klein t-shirt, so it kind of it does date it. It's not like I'm trying to make something that looks old or is in the past, but I'm obviously like drawing on this notion of the past, and also talking about how the nature of kind of rural life has changed, like the industrialization of processes. So they're using a machine which is over 100 years old. Here's like another archival image that I found latterly. Darch's Flour Mills and Bakery, not a direct descendant, but it would have been linked. This is a disused mill that I found. So I've been making work for like a long time, like maybe nearly coming up to a bit under 10 years. And the work on my website separated into chapters. These chapters might change. I've been sharing a lot more stuff that's not on the website. So there's a lot of work. So a big part of that is how I bring this all together, how I collate this work, and then going back and talking about this notion of how things have changed, things have become more industrial, and also about like photography. And again, this idea of like fate and kind of right time, that, I made these images and you've got all this kind of like dust and kind of like corn kernels and bits flying up in the air. I mean, literally this would have been kind of in the spring kind of time, early spring. And the winter that year, the factory installed a big ventilation system above the machine, so you don't have any of this dust, you don't have any of this that makes the image, that throws it up into the air. So, that's how things have kind of changed and kind of and moved forward. But I kind of felt like I just kind of got in there to make those pictures. So yeah, there's a lot going on in this work. Again, like Vale, it's really layered, and I like that idea of these kind of layers. So you don't need to know about me and my family history. You know, it's kind of that might help, but or not help. Yeah, feel free to come in. I mean, I can't see you, so
Yeah, of course, of course. I was going to ask you this is a personal project, and so it's are you looking for something here? Are you looking for yourself? Why pick something like this to not only you continue to shoot here, so this is something that is
yeah,
ongoing. Uh, Tell me about that. Are you trying to find something, or is
yeah. I don't know. You know, not in that kind of way that people go and travel to find themselves. I've got like always had quite a clear sense of me and sense of self and who I am. I think it's this place interests me, and I'm kind of drawn back to it. And it is a series that I've kind of worked on, and I've worked on it bits. And maybe the last 2 years, I've had kind of like a relatively fallow few years for me in terms of working on my projects. I've been fortunate enough to do a couple of bigger kind of artistic commissions, and then we had COVID. That was a whole big thing that came into it. But definitely this autumn, I'm back into taking pictures for this, because I'm also conscious of like, well, you know, how am I going to bring this all together? You know, it's already probably going to be like maybe 4 or 5 books. Maybe it could be more. Maybe I just carry it on and it all fits into this space, you know, much in the way that, like, you know, quite a lot of Stephen King's books are saying Castle Rock, or there's this idea that, you know, you can make work that fits into this place. So I wouldn't say it's like trying to find me, but it's just trying to, I don't know, it's just trying to kind of, I don't know, have a relationship with this place,
yeah,
this
yeah.
area. Yeah, I don't know.
You had talked about the history of your family there, and so
Yeah.
I was curious what that relationship, why that was so significant for you.
Because I think, again, it's like, you know, when you're a young person, like a teenager, at the time I was just like, oh god, family history, boring. It's like gardening. You know, you don't care about that as a teenager. I mean, maybe some teenagers do. I mean, but you know, I didn't. Too busy, kind of having fun. But kind of latterly, as you get a bit older, I guess like life experiences I've been through, it was, I don't know, I became more interested in, like, you know, where am I from? Kind of what are my roots? And equally, like on my mum's side, is really interesting that there's a direct link on my mum's side to like literally like 3 miles or so from where we're living now. So that's something that can be, you know, explored latterly. And I just thrown out this image. So again, this was like a photo that my dad took of me that I'd never seen before, like as a toddler. And this is me stood next to the gravestone of my 3 times great grandfather. So again, things like that are really interesting. It's like my past, but I don't remember it. And do you know what I mean? It's kind of, I don't know,
Oh yeah.
that notion kind of interesting as well.
So I was you had talked about seeing that gravestone and being confronted with the name Robert Darch.
Yeah,
How did that feel? Was that a little creepy? Was it
yeah, it was an,
was it kind of like our exorcist moment? Like, oh, okay, this is
yeah, it was kind of more like a realization moment. It was like, well, this is it. This is the thing now. That this is the missing piece of the jigsaw puzzle. I had all these like
yeah,
ideas. I was overcomplicating it, and it's like, well, it's kind of, in a way, it's as simple as this, but then it's maybe not so simple. There's a layering as well of lots of different things going on within the work. I wouldn't say I was creeped out. I was kind of more interested. In a way, it's kind of hard to not sound like a bit egotistical. It's like, oh, it's my name, you know. But it's like, you know, you're kind of given this name, and like, it's always been unique to me. I think that's the thing. You know, if you're like Sam Smith, then you probably might either meet another Sam Smith or a
yeah.
Dave Smith or whatever. You know, it maybe might not feel as unique, but there's always been a kind of uniqueness, I think, for me in terms of name. So yeah, it's kind of, as I said, it's you know, in a way, it's an extension of the notion of the moor as this kind of geographical place, and Vale's a geographical place, whereas like Durlescombe is like an actual name. So it's kind of, and I kind of know its work because I know someone in Devon, like several years back, was like trying to find it on the map, because it felt kind of believable in terms of existing. And then there's things like this, so like a photograph, this plaque in Winkley, and my brother's a graphic designer, so I just got him to place the Winkley with a Durlescombe in there. So there's little things that I pull in like that. So that there's within it, there's one or two images that are slightly more kind of like constructed or staged, and so then past the threshers. So then I started I found this church. I just was drawn to it because I really love the colors. But then like my distant relatives, they were like sort of devout Methodists, and it was a Methodist church. So there was that link there as well. And it was in the town where my 4 times great-grandfather lived. And then there were things like, I kind of, again, talking about signs, I found this in like an old mill that was linked to some of my kind of familial history. And I didn't realize it at the time. This was a point where I was just kind of shooting blind in a way. I didn't really know that I was kind of retracing my kind of history's kind of footsteps in terms of places that they were. And for me personally, I was, as a young person, I was a big fan of the band Devon. It's how Kurt signed off his suicide note. It's better to burn out than fade away. So there was that kind of, kind of related to that. And also like obviously they ran out of some paint, but did they purposely not finish the quote as a kind of a statement? There's all those questions. I mean, it's just like when you find this kind of stuff, I find it fascinating. I don't know.
I love your portraits, by the way. Yeah, I'm really enjoying the portraits. How important are the portraits to you, and what's your approach to those?
Yeah, really, I think really important. And I will probably have a lot of landscape photographers that might want to kind of chop my legs off. But for me, like inherently, like photographing the landscape, I think is easier than portraiture, because it's just a case of framing, shooting in the right light. And I don't know, like maybe there's an arrogance there or whatever, but for me, I always found portraits to be more challenging to get a good portrait, because you got to think about the setting, but also that it's really about the relationship between you and that person. It's the psychology between the two of you that you end up with this portrait that works really well, that they feel comfortable enough with you. There's a lot of quiet moments, like I'm not talking at all when I'm taking pictures. So there's this stillness, and I kind of want that to always translate. So don't be mad at me, landscape photographers.
There's a care there. You have a care there that I see, and there's, of course, the light plays a big factor into it. And I love how you this work has a blend of portraiture and landscape. Can you talk about that relationship? Why you feel that's necessary to have both? There's always a human element to, especially landscape. In some places, especially towns, you can see the human influence. And so is that kind of the line you're trying to draw? The people in their land, the land and the people, like, what are you trying to do here? What are you trying to say?
Well, I guess like England's like a small country with a lot of people. So there isn't really anywhere, unless you get up into the wilds of Scotland, that's not inhabited by people. So I always feel like the people, and all this landscape is farmed landscape, so it's been changed and affected by people over generations. There's not much landscape that's kind of pristine landscape. So we've played a role in that. So for me, it's really important. I think, it's just as important as the landscape. It's kind of a marriage between the two. And actually, I think like I tend to struggle thinking about just, I've worked on a few series that is just landscape, and I'm still doing that, but I tend to there's a fight to think, oh, I should include people, but sometimes you don't have to. It can just be landscape, but this is a working landscape. It's kind of a rural landscape. It's about working the land in its kind of fields and woodland and streams and farms. So I think the people are really integral to that part of the project, and I don't know, it kind of really interests me. It's I'm not necessarily the most sociable person, but I like meeting people on my terms. So you meet people that are working in the landscape, doing a job, their characters, and then I find that really interesting, learning about their lives and their experience. If they've, I guess in my point of view, kind of lived as kind of interesting or kind of, I don't know, an interesting life, really. And I kind of want that to come across in the pictures. But then also, like all of my work, people are kind of like archetypes in a way. They're like an archetype of a person. So they're them, but they're also kind of something greater, kind of like a character, I suppose. And then there were other kind of lovely coincidences. So this is John. He was there plucking the geese, and he was my connection into that. And I met him on this farm because the threshers went there, and his son-in-law owned the farm. And I got chatting to him and found out that his wife was a Darch before he married her, and she grew up on a mill. So again, just there's not that many Darches in Devon, but there's just this lovely coincidence in a way of some kind of sort of shared history, and he'd kind of invite me along to things or get to photograph stuff. So that was, kind of really rewarding as well.
Very cool. I think this series is really interesting. Partly how you're using archive images, and you're using images that you take, and how you blend landscape with portraiture. And how long do you think this series is going to go for you?
Good question. I mean, I don't know. I think I need to, as I said, I think I need to start resolving it at some point. The idea is that the book follow the seasons. So you maybe have spring, summer, autumn, winter. I think that's the kind of the general idea. But I think the problem is while you're still just shooting on it and making work, it's kind of, I guess it's still in progress, isn't it? So I don't feel like I kind of want to maybe resolve something until I feel like I'm done. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, and this is not a pressure to resolve it either. I'm just, I'm curious, I often have this conversation with people, and it's come up many times in my interviews on this show, is this idea of the long game, and being being okay with doing something for a really long time, and taking that and not necessarily being rushed by a deadline per se, like sure, I have to resolve this or whatever. I think there's a lot of magic that comes from that kind of approach. And you inherently, when you take a long approach to anything, there's a journey that you go on, and you change, and the place changes, and throughout that whole journey is kind of, in a photographer's case, it shows up in the photography. And so I think it's something that I'm drawn to a lot. And I got really excited. It's one of the reasons I wanted to see it, is because I really like this idea of just, you don't necessarily have to resolve it. You can pull out images like this and do a show already, or even make a book, make a series of books, and
And I have done. I've been, exhibiting the work. So it's not like it can be exhibited, because an exhibition anyway is always just a small example of like a wider work. The work inherently all has the same kind of feel or atmosphere, so that's fine. I think it's just, I kind of feel, and I've worked on other projects, so worked on the island in the meantime, which it is just a smaller project. I kind of know it is, and so some projects are smaller, some are longer, and I think you always have that feeling. So for me, this work is maybe kind of like sort of like the epitaph work in a way. It's kind of like this is the work. Do you know what I mean? So it's like I have to handle it. I have to handle it right. Do you know what I mean? In terms of when it actually is realized and how that might look, and and how I might do that.
You'll
and
know
also
too.
it has
You'll
no
know.
timeline, no deadline. It's kind of and going back. I might go and rephotograph with the guy I last photographed of like 6 or 7 years ago. So I like the idea that you'll see that time pass as well. And a lot of these people, will probably have sadly have passed away now because some of them were quite old when I photographed them.
Yeah.
Yeah.